Recently had the honor to present to Exponential Impact, a local entrepreneur group, about my journey with AI and how it has changed the way I think about business. This isn't a presentation about tools, it's about solving problems, building products, and creating value. I hope you find it useful. I'm Rob Mayer with My Altech. I also do a YouTube channel called Tech Drover. And, why Tech Drover? Because the good domains were taken, like Tech Cowboy, Tech Wrangler. But if you know your history, a drover was someone who ran the cattle drive, moving the herd from one location to another. So it was a pretty important position. Most AI conversations begin with tools, and I take a different approach. So mine begins with a question, which is, what changed after I started using AI every day? And I use it literally every day, pretty much all day. My wife sometimes calls it my girlfriend, but anyway. So as I went through this, this is my journey. Your journey might be different. It changed the way that I think about business. And I've got a double E and an MBA, so I kind of straddle the fence between those. And I'm not here to convince you that my journey is the right journey or the way I use it is right. Hopefully I'll give you some ideas and get you thinking. So just a little about me. I've spent decades building technology. I'm not going to say how many decades. I never do. I've been an engineer, architect, upper level management, built teams, turned around products. So, I've pretty much seen it and done it all. From startups to big businesses, government, healthcare, regulated businesses. So, may sound like a checkered past, but I've done a lot of stuff. So, when I started, I didn't think I needed AI. I'm an engineer, I built all this stuff. It was kind of an ego thing, right? I can do it, I don't need it. And, but AI kept coming up, it wasn't going to go away. So I started experimenting with it, started asking it silly questions, started asking it serious questions. One of the things I found out was AI is willing to help you even when it shouldn't. I asked it to do something one time to see what it would do. It said, sure, I can do that. Isn't that unethical? Yes, it is, maybe illegal. But it was happy to do it. I started giving it bad ideas. I'm not going to describe the bad idea on camera, but it never told me, that's a bad idea, don't do it. It was always like, well, you could do that, but maybe you should think about this. So, I'd push back. One of my favorite ones, I asked it, who sang Moni Moni better, Billy Idol or Tommy James and the Shondells? My wife and I have a disagreement on this all the time. It gave me a 2-page dissertation on that. I told it failed the Turing test, because a human is going to pick one or the other and say, I don't know that song. But it was happy to spew all this stuff out. So I started playing with it, and it really changed on 2 things. I got a job consulting, working for a company that was using a contractor. Their products had some challenges, so I was doing code analysis. I was doing business process, technical process design, just feeding that into ChatGPT, zipping up the code, feeding it in, and say, tell me about it. And on one of my products, I ran into a problem. It was a problem in iOS between the map, Swift data, and Swift UI, and I could have figured it out, and I thought, I'll put it in ChatGPT. I had an answer in a few hours. So, those kind of things just started changing, but it also gave me a different perspective. And it really comes down to starting with the problem. I work with customers on a daily basis. They have a vision of what they want to do. So taking that vision, breaking it down, understanding the problem is really the first step. Engineers, we always debate technology. We like to throw out buzzwords and jargon, and I think it's to make ourselves seem smarter and confuse other people, but that's another story. But the customer only cares about if they solve their problem. They don't care what tool you use, they just want an answer. So, I think of it that way. And the technology should follow the problem, right? You never start with, you shouldn't start with, I got this really cool thing, what can I do with it? You should start with, I got a problem. How can I solve it? That's kind of the approach I take. And so, again, that realization really changed how I look at AI. You know, and a lot of the customers I work with, we talk about building an app. We're not building an app. There's an app, but it's really a mobile-first end-to-end business solution, right? And we're not building them an app. We're building them a business. You know, you can't build an app and throw it on the store, and people are going to find it, and you're going to make hordes of money. There's a lot of work that goes into it, not just building the app. So it's not just feature screens and code. You know, it's the customer engagement, the existing content, operations, long-term value. You know, once it's out there, you got to maintain it. You got to keep it working. So there's a lot of things that go into that aren't really part of AI, but they're part of building a business. Another thought that came to me is it's kind of like those laser engraving tools. I mean, I got one. I've used it for a lot of stuff. It's a nice tool, but you see the great demos and all the cool things you can do with it, and the 3D engravers, you know, and you buy one, you might buy some plans off the internet, create some stuff, and if you've ever walked into any of the shops in downtown or old Colorado City, they've all got those layered laser cut things because people buy that. You know, if you're going to take advantage of it, you got to do your own thing. And when you start thinking about that, it's a lot of work. You got to figure it out, decide what you want to do, and then you got to set up the files and set it up for the laser printer, or the laser engraver. So a lot of times those end up in the corner just gathering dust. You know, and I think a lot of the AI tools are kind of that way. Everybody's trying to build AI tools to do certain things, but the decision you need to make is what tools are going to help you solve your problem and how you're going to do it. So building better systems, you know, the data, the context become important. You know, when I started my own product, I've got 2 products on the stores right now, a third one probably in a month or so. You know, I wasn't trying to build a better weather application. I was building a weather decision support system. And that's really a different problem. And I started that with working with ChatGPT. Well, actually, I started that one coding myself. I built a backend that handles like 1.6 billion data points, half of which are updated every hour. I built some Swift UI code. I ran into that problem and had ChatGPT fix it. And I also ran into some issues with the database. I had to optimize it, not only for ingest speed, but query speed. And dealing with that volume of data, that was a pretty challenging problem. I started working with ChatGPT on it, and I would get down a path, and it's like, it got stuck, you know, in a certain way of thinking. I had to like say, okay, give me a summary and start a new chat. I had to do that several times. And when I was doing that app, it does data analysis. So for the context of what you're doing outdoors, the weather, you know, is different than if you're doing another activity, right? And I thought I should use AI for that. And as I thought about it, all the data I would have to generate to train a model to run on the device, it's like, man, it's just easier to write code. So I wrote code, and I later had ChatGPT optimize it. On my next app, I worked it out with ChatGPT, what the app should do, how it should work, what features it should have, how an analysis engine should work. And I generated the app. It first generated different screens of the navigation. I tweaked that, and then I just went through and said, make this feature work, make this feature work, make this feature work. And in my spare time, in a couple of weeks, I had a functional app. And it's called My Owl Fishing. It tells you where you're going to fish, what the weather's going to be, where you should fish in the lake, and what bait or lures to use. You know, and all that was done with ChatGPT. Didn't write a single line of code at all. So starting with that context, that definition, the clarity of what you're trying to do is much more important than what tool you use to do it. And the other part of that is AI is a tool. It's not the solution. You know, I can do stuff in my ChatGPT, but I can't give it to you, right? So, in some of the customers I've worked with in my day job, yeah, like one lady had an app. It had some bugs. You weren't going to ever use it more than once. So I started working with her on some ideas to bring people back to it occasionally. And did some prototypes, again, defined it all with ChatGPT. In that case, with her permission, I installed the app on my Android tablet, took the APK off of it, gave it to ChatGPT and said, give me a Flutter app that does this. And it did it. I had one. And then I had to change it. I had to add features. She presented it to some people, some people, and came back and told me I was a genius. And so I had another customer that had an image classification app, that wasn't working. And so I used ChatGPT, generated some Python scripts, did some transfer training with MobileNet v3, and had a model, a machine learning model that would run on an iPhone or an Android device. And then I took it another step, kind of fun. I went around my house taking pictures of things that might look like what it was trying to classify, and things that are what it's trying to classify. And that is a gate for, do I have the right an image or not, that runs in real time on a device and runs about 98% effective. The challenge I have on that one is there just wasn't enough actual data that we could collect to train it. So I'm actually taking a different approach using images and text. Again, all just with ChatGPT. One of my more interesting projects, and it ties in with some of the stuff we were talking earlier, I think, we needed a way to analyze documents. So we'd have one document that described the criteria, and then we'd have a pile of other documents we needed to score. So built out how that should work, what the workflow should be, all with ChatGPT. Then I generated some scripts using a LLM that runs on my MacBook. And in a day, I iterated like 12 times, had it build some scripts, ran some tests, fed it back the data, changed the scripts. Did that about 12 times. By the end of the day, I had something that was working pretty well, all running on my MacBook, not tying into any of the cloud LLMs, because that's cheaper. I don't have to worry about huge AI bills coming up that way. So, just thinking about the problem, what you're trying to solve, code, syntax, that's no longer the bottleneck, that's no longer the challenge. It's what are you trying to accomplish, and then how can I get there? So, using AI effectively, it does require someone to guide it. It will wander off, it will get stuck on things. I had it generate some services once and told it, no, that's not gonna work. Yeah, they worked, but it wasn't built for a production environment. So, and then when I had it redo it, they actually worked first time. So, in summary, technology changes. AI is no different than any other inflection point in history. Electricity, cars, the internet. Somebody was talking about that earlier. And the better AI becomes, judgment, experience becomes much more valuable. You can't just throw it at a problem and take what it gives you. You've got to know how to guide it. You've got to know how to evaluate what it comes out with. And interestingly enough, I saw an article this week. Ford just rehired a bunch of experienced engineers, not because they gave up on AI or thought it was bad, because they needed that experience to guide it, to get the right answers, instead of just relying on AI. So, the bottom line, the AI tools make experience more important, and guiding it the right way is required to get the right outcomes. So it all comes down to think first, build faster. So if got a couple of QR codes from a couple of my websites, I've got several. I've got some little 60-second videos I created up there using ChatGPT and OpenArt. I keep chats around because it's my history. It knows everything about it, so I can go back and ask questions when I forget something. So anyway, that's my journey with AI. Yours may be different, and hopefully you learn something from it and have some things to think about. Thanks for watching, and as always, think first, build faster.